Hello and welcome to another Light Reading sponsored video. My name is Phil Harvey and I'm the editor-in-chief of Light Reading. And here at Light Reading, we just finished up the 2022 Light Reading Leading Lights Awards, our 18th presentation of the awards. This program is one of the major ways that our publication reflects on and recognizes the innovation and the achievements of the space that we cover, the global communications marketplace. Telecom and all that implies. Joining me today is one of the winners of one of our leading lights categories, the most innovative routing and switching solution category. And that's awarded to a vendor that launches or improves the most innovative hardware or software-based routing and switching solution for network operators. And that would be Cisco Systems. And joining me from Cisco is Bill Gartner. Hi, Bill.
Hi, Phil. How are you doing? Thanks for having us. And thank you very much for the award. We're very, very delighted to have that recognition.
Well, thanks for joining me. And I'm glad that Cisco participated. I was quite, as our judges were, we were quite impressed with the entry overall. And also, in general, Cisco's journey, from a kind of hardware only vendor to being more software centric, more disaggregated, more of a modern networking supplier has been really intriguing to watch. For today's video, I do want to talk about routed optical networking because that was front and center of the reason that that the company's routing solutions have been recognized. So let's start with what is routed optical network.
Great. Well, thanks again, Phil. Let me try to provide a brief overview of routed optical networking. It's really a network architecture that incorporates routing, optical, and optics technologies. And it's motivated by a key economic trend and a couple of technology trends. Now, if we look back 20 years or so, the router was by far the most expensive resource in the network. And what happened is we basically built technologies to bypass the router whenever you could, because it was just too expensive to go through the router. So we built very sophisticated optical switching technologies in the form of ROADMs or an OTN layer that was generally carrying private line services as well. And effectively, we built these very complex layers in the network so that now we have, in almost all cases, 2 layers, and in some cases, 3 layers of network complexity that has to be managed, different life cycles, different operations that have to be managed. Now, today, thanks to advances in silicon, we're seeing silicon on routers that support 25 terabits of capacity, and we can expect that will grow to 50 and 100 terabits. And that has really driven down the cost per bit very, very dramatically on routers. And it's also driven down the power per bit. And separately, thanks to advances in silicon photonics technology, we can now deliver what was previously delivered in the form of a chassis-based transponder sitting in the optical layer, that can now be delivered in the form of a pluggable that goes into the router. And so if we step back and ask ourselves, would we build a network architecture the way we did for the last 20 years, given these advances in technologies? The answer is no. And we've done a lot of detailed modeling with customers. And what we found is that, for the most part, bypassed wavelengths are very underutilized. They're low utilization, lightly loaded wavelengths, but they were put in place for good economic reasons at the time. And if we now think about the fact that the router is no longer the most expensive thing of the resource, and we have a pluggable 400 gig DWDM optic, we can now leverage the IP layer to do what it's best at, and that's to aggregate services and have those demands flow hop by hop through routers that we previously wanted to bypass, and rather than going around them. And this results in fewer wavelengths, much better utilization at the wavelength and the fiber layer, and delivers very significant savings, TCO savings to our customers. You use far fewer wavelengths in that, and you get a much better utilization overall in the network. Now, I do want to stress one thing that my competitors love to throw out as FUD. ROADMs still have a role to play. They have a role to play in delivering wavelength services, or when the capacity of a demand approaches the port rate of a router, for instance, 400 gig today. Now, additionally, in addition to the silicon and the coherent pluggables, routed optical networking implies that we deliver private line services at the IP layer. And that's one of the most significant recent innovations made possible by something called private line emulation, where we can emulate OTN services or private line services and deliver them directly from the IP layer. That allows us to do things like eliminate an OTN layer. And then finally, we have to manage all that. And that's what drove our acquisition of Sedona, which really looks at converging the IP and optical layers. So that's the summary. It leverages advances in silicon at the IP layer, silicon photonics to deliver pluggable coherent optics, private line emulation at the IP layer, and automation.
That's a great overview. You know, the idea of converging optical and IP has been, persistent in the industry for 20 some odd years. You know, it's definitely something that several vendors have chased, and Cisco has been a proponent of this in the past for sure. What's different about routed optical networking, and as far as achieving this, and then how does that sort of stand up to what competitors are putting out there, like coherent routing?
So one thing I would say is that previous incarnations of trying to converge IP and optical really suffered from a number of key challenges. One was that there was always a density penalty that was imposed on the router in order to integrate the optical transponder into the router. And that could take the router capacity on a line card down to 30% of what it would have otherwise been. That was in spite of the fact that there was some economic savings. You eliminated things like short reach optics. You might eliminate chassis and save some space and power. That trade-off was not a fair trade-off for some of our customers. Many customers said, I'd rather preserve the density in the router. And again, that was done at a time when the cost of a router was the most significant thing in the network. So that, I think, was one huge impediment to some of the previous incarnations of trying to converge IP and optical. Another one, I think, was that we didn't really focus enough attention on the management issues associated with managing a separate IP domain and a separate optical domain. And that's an area that's gotten much, much more focus in recent times.
Okay, that makes sense. Let me make sure I have the economic sort of story straight as far as routed optical networking. So obviously, if you're combining optical and IP layer, you're not only getting rid of, like you said, your potential to get rid of some hardware in the network. It also seems to simplify the management layer. Are there other economic considerations I'm leaving out there?
Yeah, so I'd say the economic considerations. First of all, we've had some independent analysis done beyond our own detailed network models that we've done with customers. The independent analysis suggests somewhere like 40 to 45% total cost of ownership savings can be achieved. Now, that arises from CapEx savings, and the CapEx savings are derived from things like eliminating transponders, eliminating the short reach optics that connect the transponder to the router, eliminating the chassis that carries that transponder and replacing it with a pluggable optic. But we also see OpEx savings, and the OpEx savings arise from some of the same things. Eliminating those chassis save power and save space. And then overall, really at the network layer, we're collapsing what are often 2 or 3 layers into a single layer. So that simplifies operations. You don't have separate life cycles to manage. You don't have separate planning and operations processes to manage. So there are some softer savings as well. And then the other one that I mentioned earlier is that there are far fewer wavelengths that are deployed in the network. So there's simply less wavelength management that has to be done, and that translates into both CapEx and OpEx savings.
Yeah, that's something when we talk to service providers, they want the highest availability and reliability they can possibly get, but they don't want it to be any more complex than than they're already dealing with. And of course, they're also dealing with their own challenges of automation, fewer people, that having to do more with less, that sort of thing. So this seems to fit right along with their concerns. Another concern they bring up all the time is using less power, space, and and energy in general. So does routed optical networking sort of give them a sustainability story?
Yeah, I think it's a huge issue. I mean, all of our customers now have, sustainability objectives. And the way they have to meet those is basically by reducing power consumption. And so that is a big focus area for us. And I think as we think about what are the key problems that have to be solved as we go forward for the next 10 years, If we look back the last 10 years, it was basically improve capacity, improve the utilization on a fiber. So we went from 10 gig to 40 gig to 100 gig to 400 gig per wavelength. We're starting to approach fundamental limits there. And I don't think we're going to see that capacity gain as the key thing that we need to drive. It's going to be more about, can we reduce power and can we reduce cost? And I think all of our customers have sustainability objectives that can be met by reducing power. We are focused pretty heavily on that across Cisco with things like new process nodes on silicon. But the routed optical networking architecture by itself results in typically 30% power savings is what we see. And it comes from eliminating parts of many components in the network and going to things that are simply lower power. And whether it's silicon or whether it's an optic. And so it's a huge focus for our customers. And I think the routed optical network can help drive to help them meet their sustainability objectives.
That's great. What has been the customer progress? I mean, that was the other thing that kind of stood out in the leading lights process as we're looking at entries and stuff. Is like, these solutions can't just be great whiteboard material. they have to have real customer progress. So how have things been going with customers?
So we've got over 20 customers that are deploying the routed optical networking architecture now. I would say this is a journey. This is an architectural shift for customers. And as you know, especially as we get into the bigger service provider customers, those architectural shifts take years, not months. So we're patient to see that this takes place. And as we respond to our customer needs for ideas about how to get to a simpler architecture, a more cost-effective architecture, a more power-effective architecture, we are having deep discussions with them about routed optical networking. I think we've got something like a dozen customers that have issued press releases on this at this point. We've got over 20 that have deployed it. But I think this is a multi-year journey. I would say over the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to see much greater take rate from customers for the full architecture.
Yeah, and folks that are regular readers of light reading, one of the things we try to emphasize is that, especially lately, is that all service providers, even though we're talking about these things as a certainty in the industry, they're all coming at this from a completely different starting point. So it's like and this is important for considering sustainability stuff as well. It's like when they're changing their architecture or they're trying to evolve to a kind of network that's not that doesn't use as much energy and that sort of thing. They all start from a different place, and some take longer to get there than others, and then some have other capital constraints that other companies don't. So it is an interesting thing. But I think as far as an architecture goes, that seems like a lot of industry agreement that you guys are pushing people in the right direction here.
Yeah, one thing I would say along those lines, Phil, first of all, I agree. I mean, everybody's at a different starting point. If you look broadly at the web players versus the classic service providers, they're very, very different starting points. Even within the service provider segment, they all have different starting points based on the networks that they've deployed over the last 20 years. I do think one of the things that we have focused a lot on is making sure this is an open architecture. And so that's an important principle for Cisco. We want this to be open at every layer, whether it's the optical layer, whether it's the DWDM interface, or obviously the IP solution. And I think we've got a good track record of demonstrating that we're committed to open. This is the first time we've seen an open DWDM interface. We're very excited about that. We think it's good for our customers, and we think it's good for the industry.
Okay, Bill, last question. What comes next in the routed optical networking evolution?
So I think we will certainly see advances in the silicon photonics that allow us to get from 400 gig, for instance, to 800 gig and beyond. We'll continue to see advances in silicon. We're now delivering 25 terabits in a router that will clearly grow to 50 and well beyond. Those will help, again, to drive down cost per bit and power per bit and to get to much simpler networks for our customers. I think, as I mentioned, a lot of our focus is going to be on reducing power and reducing cost, but we will continue to see incremental improvements in these technologies. And then I think the one that has probably got the most opportunity for significant improvement is in simplifying operations for our customers through automation. I think we're investing a lot there, and we really see that looking back, I think the industry in general profited off of complexity, and we really need to simplify the life of our customers.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to leave it, because I think that's where, the general industry trend is, because the customers really want to focus on what they're doing and not, how great they are at running networks and managing all the stuff in the background. So I think and I mean that as the end customers. Obviously, the service providers want to be great at running networks, but the folks that they're trying to reach are they want it as simple as possible, and that permeates the ecosystem, that sort of thing. So
absolutely.
Well, again, congratulations on the Leading Lights award.
Thank you again.
And it was great to have you on this video, Bill. Thanks so much.
Thanks much, Phil. Good seeing you. Take care now.